Good evening. Welcome to our Black Girl Math conversation for March. We're celebrating Women's History Month with two of my colleagues in education and also in the um, juvenile justice system world so that we can talk more around what's happening with Black girls and women. So I am joined by Dr. Tiffany Monfort Dent and Kaneka Turner. Thank you both for joining me. So Dr. Tiffany Monfort Dent is a licensed psychologist, motivational speaker, and author. Her primary areas of interest are sexual violence prevention and intervention on the continuum, the role of intersectionality in the lives of Black and Brown girls and women in culturally informed work with those within the juvenile justice system. Dr. Tyff is also one of the three women who founded Centering Sisters, a movement focused on centering the experiences of Black women and girls to create a space for dialogue and healing. I also want to introduce Kaneka Turner, who is a math enthusiast who calls Charlotte, North Carolina home. She is a 22-year veteran educator who has been specializing in elementary math education for the past 17 years and is currently working as lead grade 4 writer for illustrative mathematics elementary curriculum. Kanika also is one of the three founders of Black Women Rock Math, an online collective of hidden voices in math education to empower Black women and girls to share their experiences as students and educators. Welcome, Dr. Tiff. Welcome, Kanika.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, in both of your work that you've been doing, I am just in awe of the conversations and how you're talking about centering Black girls and women in both of your areas. So, one of my first questions I always ask is, what's your why? What drives you in your work to center Black girls and women?
Sure. So my why is two part. There's sort of my why as it relates to math, and then there's my why um, as it relates to women and girls, particularly Black women and girls. And so my why for math is just about the spark. That it's about learning. It's about being present when learning is taking place, which is sort of in the midst of confusion, but it's in the midst of questioning, it's in the midst of understanding and epiphany. Like that space is a space like if I could live there, I would just live there. And so you get to see all of that and a lot of that in the teaching and learning of mathematics. So that is sort of what I enjoy experiencing for myself and seeing in other people. So that sort of is why math. I sort of zero in on math, and then that sort of leads me to the why with regards to women, particularly Black women. And because Black women are the grown up version of Black girls, they just sort of go together. But um, I've had some I have some I've had some pretty traumatic experiences with regards to math in my grade school years. And those experience I didn't realize when I was in the midst of them. I didn't realize until after I had come out of them and sort of been invited into other spaces that I had even gone through that. And so it was later in life that I realized that. Then I started to look around. It's sort of like when I got my corrective lenses, right? Like, so I didn't realize how clear the world could be until I got these things. And it's like, oh my goodness. And so it's the same thing. I had these experiences that sort of opened my eyes to and allowed me to see the classrooms that I was in differently. I could see who wasn't engaging, who wasn't being invited, who wasn't selected. And quickly, having moved out of that into teacher leadership, I could see it there too. I looked to my left, I looked to my right. Where are the others? And I didn't see them. And so why wasn't I seeing them? What was that all about? And then leaving that and going into other work, this pattern continued, this sort of lack of representation. Um, and then just running into Dion and Deborah at IM, and then sitting down to actually talk to someone about what I was noticing. It was just sort of like, there's this thing that's going on. What can we do about that? And so that's sort of where that why is sort of multifaceted. There are lots of things that fuel the why, that is Black women and Black girls, particularly in math. Yeah, and so that's sort of all of that.
Thanks, Kaneka. Dr.
I
Tyff.
think for me, it's that there is no space that prioritizes Black women and girls. Um, Within racism spaces, we prioritize Black men and boys. We have this conversation where if we're talking racial justice, racial stress, trauma, whatever, we are talking about Black men and boys. When we talk
Mhm.
about incarceration, even though I work within the juvenile justice system, we act like that is only impacting Black men and boys. When we're looking in gender spaces, it's always about white women and white girls. So there was this void of recognizing and centering Black women and girls, prioritizing them, not only acknowledging how amazing Black women and girls are, but also the challenges that they face, um, because there's nowhere that's designed for them. And that the only time we begin to have these conversations about them is in their adjacency to someone or some other group. And then suddenly we'll pull them, white women and girls will pull us in for feminist movements and say, see, rally with us, Black men, even though we founded Black Lives Matter. It was founded by women and femmes. They are not at the That is not the image that's projected out there. We're expected to assist in everybody's oppression and marginalization, and also amplify everybody else's accomplishments and not our own. And so that's the why for me, is to amplify the voices of Black women, girls, and femmes, to also make space for them that is their space alone, and also insist that they matter, and that in any movement, in any situations where there's oppression and marginalization, that we also have to look at how it impacts them.
Thank you for sharing. And Dr. Tiff, you talked about a void. What is happening? If we think of like the well-publicized ones, a 6-year-old, getting handcuffed, 9-year-old getting pepper sprayed. In the education space, Dr. Dina Simmons having to leave where she has been and worked, and then getting trolled for her work on Twitter. And we see that all the time in different spaces. Like, what is happening in Black girls and women in your spaces that you work in, and what is the work that you do to support them?
I think first of all, we there's this dehumanization and adultification of girls. The handcuffing of the 6-year-old Black girl, the pepper spraying of the 9-year-old Black girl, when they were in school a couple years ago, and the resource officer overturned a desk with a Black girl in it. These are considered acceptable because we, for one, expect adult behavior out of Black girls specifically. We don't allow them to be children, and temper tantrums in children are common. And then we also dehumanize them by saying we can treat you like trash and like animals. Um, there would have been such a bigger outcry if those behaviors would have been done to white girls, but first of all, they wouldn't have been. Or like the incident where the one white girl was trolling a Muslim girl within the school, and the teachers was allowing her to pick on her, grab her scarf, do all this other stuff. It was only when the Black girl came in and was like, no, and started to go at the white girl, then the teacher suddenly is in there separating everything. Now it's a problem because of this expectation of how we frame Black girlhood. So I think one of the things is I operate under resistance and resilience, and that we need those in combination. So I work with Black girls on advocating for themselves. I normalize their frustration and say they have a right to all of those feelings. When I am in I sit on a bunch of committees, and I've sat on some for juvenile court before, community-based ones, where I'm always challenging, are we treating Black girls differently than their white counterparts for the same behavior? And oftentimes it's more punitive. Even the language we use, we call them manipulative. We call the white girls advocating for their needs. We call the Black girl resistant. We call the white girl struggling to engage. So even in the language we use, we criminalize and pathologize them. So challenging those beliefs about Black girlhood. For Black women, I think it's this understanding for Black women. One of the things we do in Centering Sisters is just even trying to make space for your voice, to acknowledge that things impact us differently, and that's okay. Also pushing for spaces where Black women can be Black women and vulnerable, where they don't have to worry about the language of attacking and aggressive, or the minimizing of your talents, and amplifying their voices in the works that they do, through retreats, through connecting them to resources that and networks that are there specifically to assist Black women.
Thanks, Dr. Tiff. Kaneka, what is happening? And you said in your work looking for that spark. What are you seeing in classrooms, or even as you are thinking about curriculum for fourth grade students? How are you centering Black girls and women in your spaces?
Yeah. Um, so these days, well, for the past 2.5 years at least, there's been minimal time inside the classroom. I mean, I have very minimal time. But each moment, each opportunity that I have in coaching, to be in a classroom with students, I see it. So it only takes, if I can't get into a school but 12 times in 12 months, I'm going to see it every single time. So I'm going to see a lot of what Dr. Tiff mentioned, even in terms of the way students are dealt with. But you're asking me about the spark, and you're asking me about curriculum. And so
And you can
um,
share
I,
also what you're seeing in classrooms too. That was awesome.
yeah, I just really, it's interesting. You can visualize scenes that are normal, or normalized, that have been normalized, of interactions with students that are rooted in something much bigger than the child, that aren't being addressed for many, many reasons. So that just felt like that's really on my heart after listening to what was just shared. Um, and so in terms of curriculum design, in the tasks that we're designing, but not just in the context of the tasks, but also in sort of the planned enactment of the task, we're thinking about ways in which we make space for the types of interactions that students need. Like, they need opportunities to say things in their own words, with their own voice, before an adult provides the thing that they need to say, like what they need to think or understand, right? They need opportunities to represent their own ideas in terms of different representations, not just words, right? They need opportunities to be physical. They're children. They need opportunities to move. They shouldn't have to sit and be sort of dictated to throughout a lesson. And some of this is like any child, right? Any child. But so I'm bringing my experience as a young Black girl in math class, right? And the need to discuss with someone else. And many times someone who understands what I'm saying, like someone who can hear me, and I don't have to change my words, or use certain body actions. Like I can just bring my full self to the discussion and we can sort of engage. And there's this beautiful video that I've seen of some children. They have to be in New York because the way they talk about the way they pronounce the numbers, I just know they're in the middle of the city somewhere. And they're multiplying groups of 25. And the girls are so like, if you didn't know, I can imagine people watching this clip and saying, oh my gosh, they're so loud and they're so aggressive. And the child off to the side is like, these are things that you hear people say when they watch this clip. But what's beautiful is like, these girls are so passionate about these groups that they see and how these groups fit together and moving these cubes and like, no, 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 it's this. Oh, yes. It's like the way they push back and forth on each is really, really beautiful. The passion that they bring. But that's not readily sort of accepted. So when we design curriculum, we're attempting to design the experiences such that they make space for such things. Although we know at the end of the day, it's left in the hands of the enactor. But we're doing our best to at least provide the spaces for that because we believe that true spark comes up in those spaces, right? Where where students can bring sort of who they are to the full experience and then sort of tell you what they're coming up with. So um yeah, that's some of the ways in which I'm thinking about it. And not just me, but members of my team are thinking about that as well.
I think one of the things you didn't say that automatically stood out for me in terms of that spark, representation matters for Black girls.
Mhm.
And your presence walking into the room saying Black girls do math. I actually did this series at one point on social media. It was like things that they say Black girls don't do. Black girls don't swim. Black girls don't do math. Black girls don't do opera. So it was this fact that Black girls can do everything.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
sometimes we don't realize the things we can do until we see us represented doing them. So
Mhm.
part of it is that I'm like, wow, if you just walked in my class, I'm like, this is what we do, because our math teachers don't look like us and have that spark and excitement about the subject. And then just that piece of it of being in the room when curricula are being developed to be able to say, how is this going to show up and how is this going to be taken in by
Mhm.
Black girls? So I just think that that's awesome.
Mhm. Full agreement there. Full agreement. When when I walk into a room, the number one question is, "Whose mom are you?" And normally they try to find the child with the big hair or the like, whose hair is natural or curly. And are you such and such mom? Are you her aunt? Are you no? And you're right. We do have some lovely conversations that are rooted in the awe that children have in that. Like, and you go to other schools and you work with teachers and like that's really interesting. So you're right. Yeah, definitely.
And Dr. Tiff, something you said sparked one of my favorite quotes from Shonda Rhimes, which is, "You can't be what you can't see." And so, how do we how are we already creating spaces and also create spaces that are sustainable and practices that are sustainable, got to get that word out, for Black girls and women, where they are centered and where they can, have a seat at the table, or aren't so shocked when one of us walk into the room, or aren't shocked when someone is standing up for them and advocating for them. So what are some practices, or what are some ways that we can center and continue to center Black girls and women in spaces that continue, that someone else can like pick up and run with?
I think for one, Black women need to recognize that it's important because Black women can be the biggest ally for Black girls, or we can cause the most harm, depending upon how we show up and what we insist is important. Um, it never fails when I'm having conversations about Black girls and their needs. I did this thing about within 5 questions, it becomes what about Black boys? And let's talk about our sons. And that conversation, most of the time, is Black women changing the discussion from Black girls. So part of it is us recognizing that we are valued and we deserve to be centered as Black women. And by doing that, we then pass on that message to Black girls and don't let the conversation turn from them. We also need to, as a collective, as Black women, make it our mission to prioritize our daughters. To give them the things that we wish somebody would have given to us or said for us, or the way we wish they would have shown up for us. Because a lot of times we show up for Black girls the way that people showed up for us. And a lot of times it's not good. It's either they don't show up, they half show up, or they show up in a way that is harmful to us or makes devalues us. And so part of it is us unpacking our own stuff and saying, you know what, at 12, what did I need? At 15, what did I need that would have made my life better and filled with more joy? And then we need to, on a daily basis, be conscious of the fact that we are giving that to the next generation of Black girls. And that we rely on each other to do that, that we make it our mission to create spaces for Black girls, whether it's, I'm going to do Black girls do math. And so therefore I'm making a conscious decision, unapologetically saying, this is a space where Black girls are going to come together and we're going to figure out math problems and we're going to talk about careers in math, and it's going to be for them. I'm going to consciously seek out other Black women who are engaged in this same process, who are in the STEM field, and say, I need you to be a part of this. And how do we make this happen across different cities? How do we open that door? But I think because we are so programmed to not prioritize ourselves, I mean, we're taught to sacrifice for everybody, that it takes truly being strategic, truly being planful, conscious, that we are constantly making sure that we don't leave our girls behind.
Yeah. And so that makes me think about the exact same sort of ideas just moved into the spaces that Black women are in, particularly speaking about Black women in math education, right? So one of the things that we are working, sort of our mission, is to make a space to bring us together, to begin to have the conversations. Not so much, we haven't had many conversations, well, yes, we have, around what our needs are, but it's been sort of informal. And it's really interesting because something that you have me thinking about is how we may not be comfortable. Like, the reason why we may not be having as many conversations is because we may not be comfortable having the conversation be about us and unpacking sort of where we are, how we got here, and what our needs are in this particular space. We have been speaking about the lack of presence. In addition to that, something that we've been working toward that I think needs to continue to happen is thinking about how we prepare. So not just invite each other to conversations and opportunities, but prepare each other for the opportunities that we're setting them up or inviting them into. And then I think that more of us, well, organizations need to recognize, though I'm not exactly sure how we go about this. Organizations need to recognize that you can't determine the needs of Black women within a given organization without Black women in the organization making the helping to make those determinations. Like, who else is better to help you figure that out than the women who are in the midst of it? But also recognizing that it's not enough for us to come to be invited to the table if we haven't done some work around what is it that we need, right? So I think a sort of beginning conversations, bringing people together, finding each other, thinking about what we need, like what are our needs? Also considering why we're not here, why are we not present, what might that mean, and then so in terms of what our goals are, what might that mean, and then once we get there, what's our role sort of after that, what's our goal, and how do we continue to do that for women who come alongside us, right? Like, how do we continue to bring women into the fold? All of that feels really important in terms of Black women, particularly in math education right now.
Thank you both. One other question, and Dr. Tyff, I'm wanted to specifically say what is happening. Say, for example, what are some practices that you're seeing around in the juvenile justice system that are sustainable or sustaining and centering Black women and girls?
In most juvenile justice systems, nothing. I do know that Tara Shepard is doing some amazing work in Arkansas and has been for a while on the prevention and intervention side, specifically with Black girls. She did some great research on trauma's presentation for Black girls within that system that is now informing that work. I think within other systems, the issue becomes it still prioritizes Black boys and programming designed for them. Um, because one of the things within most systems, they look at numbers. It's just like why when curricula were used for services within juvenile justice, they were geared towards boys because they make up the majority of the juvenile justice system. They continue to make up the majority of the juvenile justice system. Girls are rapidly increasing, but we don't focus on them because we focus on who is making up our detention centers, who is making up our juvenile prisons. Within Ohio, we don't even have a juvenile prison for girls anymore. They're in programs that are similar to prisons, but because they're not in the prison system, we don't define it as such. I know that some things before COVID that we were in discussions, specifically in my area, about what does work for girls need to look like, and specifically for Black girls. And we talked about if Black girls are on probation, how do we increase the number of probation officers who look like them? How do we look at the diversion numbers? Are we diverting girls from the juvenile justice system, Black girls, at the same rate as white girls? Or are we giving grace to white girls that we're not giving to Black girls for the same crime? So beginning to look at that piece of it. Insisting upon mentoring programs geared towards Black girls that are not paid, because we know once something is not paid for anymore, it's hard enough for Black girls to be vulnerable and connect. And when you've given somebody 20 hours to spend with them and then it ends and they know that that's the status of it, that is not going to work for us. So what does unpaid mentoring look like? When we're implementing programs within the detention center, are they trauma informed? Are they looking at issues of racial stress? Are they recognizing that intersection of Black and girl? So those were some things we were beginning to discuss before COVID. And then COVID has even changed that system because a lot of things just kind of got put on hold. Court cases, things like that. You have kids just waiting for a year to even have a hearing. So in that interim, nothing happens. But those were some of the things we were starting to talk about when the world closed. So.
Thank you. And two of my favorite things too that are centering Black women and girls, and you both did mention. So one, Kaneka's work with Dion Deborah with Black Women Rock Math. Every Thursday, there's a new Black woman or Black girl who's sharing their math story. And then also every other Wednesday, Dr. Tyff, Carolyn and Tammy are also centering conversations around Black women and our issues and needs and during centering sisters every other Wednesday. So I wanted to share that. I was like, wait, that has been sustaining me, especially during this time of just like, hey, where are the places where I can be, especially now that, living just at home and just, in my own space. And so what can sustain me? So I just wanted to shout out both of you and the work that you're doing and what's sustaining me throughout, COVID.
Thank you. I think one of the interesting things you said is that we have to, and it was said earlier about we have to create those spaces. You can't come up with things for Black women, as you had said before, for Black women without including the voices of Black women, which is the same for Black girls. And so I think one of the awesome things is saying, you know what, we're not waiting on this to happen. We as Black women and Black girls need to create these spaces, these conversations, whether it's, again, clubs or committees or different types of content, books, all of those things, that we have to create these things for ourselves. Because if we leave it up to other people, we know what a disaster that will be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kanika, did you want to share anything about Black Women Rock Math?
Yeah, just I can't say enough how well, one thing, the posts that come out every Thursday varies. Sometimes there is the story, a math story of the author, and other times it's just lifting sort of expertise in different areas around mathematics, because in general, expertise in mathematics is not focused on the Black female voice. It's focused on the white male voice and then any other voice before the Black female voice. And so it's um, the blog posts are about making space for Black women in education, in math education, to share their expertise in the voice that they bring. And what's lovely about it is it's we are not micromanaging that voice that comes out, because we need people to understand that all Black women don't think the same. All Black women in math education don't all share the exact same ideas. We have, like, there's this vast array of the way we approach things, and that's what makes the conversation really interesting. Um, and so the just sort of breaking barriers around boxing us in and defining the way we think and uh, what we endorse, by allowing space for us to do that for ourselves. The most recent post was pretty controversial. People were not agreeing around that. And I had a great conversation with someone about that. Like, yeah, not all Black people think the same. Like, we don't all Black women don't agree on what it means to teach fluency in math. So yeah, I just really appreciate all of the voices that are, all of the ways in which women are being willing to contribute their voice for other women and girls in math education, for us to share. It's a gift.
And I thank you both, Dr. Tyff and Kanika, for sharing your voice with Black Girl Math for our session on Black girls belonging. So thank you so, so much for your time and for sharing your expertise.
You are most welcome. And I thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I agree.
Thank you. Thank you.